from Tehran,
Yeah, I
but
have.
and these oil products are going to cause cancer, long-term cancer. So they doom the civilian population of Tehran. And you know, the irony, of course, is that if there's one place that would be most supportive of regime change, a city that would most welcome the Americans is actually the city of Tehran, with its progressive, well-educated urban population.
Mhm.
And now you've turned the entire city of Tehran against you. You've unified the Persian people because now they see this as a matter of life and death. With regard to the Persian diaspora, well, I mean, like they are just a diaspora, right? So they're similar to the Cubans in Florida. If you go, yeah, if you go to Miami, right, like someone like Marco Rubio, they're all crazy when it comes to Cuba. Right now, look, people forget this, but right now, the Americans are starving to death Cuba. Cuba relied on Venezuela energy, and once Maduro was kidnapped and replaced, then these oil exports declined, and now Cuba is under de facto embargo. They cannot get any energy, and so they don't have water. They don't have electricity. They're starving to death, and no one's reporting this. And these Cubans in Florida are celebrating the fact that wow, now they can go home. And so the same situation with the Persians in LA, where they were kicked out in 1979 because they were corrupt and they were decadent. And that just made them very angry. And they grew up with these stories of how glorious Persia was under their reign, and they are intent on going back and running the country again.
We saw the same thing with Venezuela. They were cheering on their president being kidnapped, thinking that it was going to be freed. They were thanking Trump. And it just shows how many people become victim to this Western propaganda. And in the midst of all this, they are saying now, I'm seeing Lindsey Graham and Trump talk about Cuba is in the midst of this war. Now Cuba is next. Why Cuba now? What is really going on? Is it the fact that they're not involved in the Rothschild central bank system? Why Cuba in the midst of Iran war?
Right. So I think this is very much an empire in decline. So if you just look at all these empires in history and how they behave when they are in decline, they behave exactly like this, where they're going and conquering anyone they can to prove that they are still the empire. So an empire in decline, the decline is basically you cannot reverse the decline because your people, the very nature of your people, have become corrupt, right? So before Americans worked in factories and made things. Now they just make things up, meaning that, for the past 20, 30 years, the main economy was focused on financialization, creating like these derivatives, creating these gambling mechanisms for the world. And that led to, of course, the 2008 great financial crisis. And America's never really recovered from that. I mean, look at the decadence in America today. I'm not sure if this statistic is correct. You can tell me if this is correct or not, right? But apparently 20% of all American white girls in their 20s are on OnlyFans, something like that. All right. I'm not sure if you've heard this, but just the idea that you have a percentage of American white girls in the 20s all on OnlyFans. That's just incredible to think about, okay? And like the people joke that that's what America wants to do. America wants to liberate Iranian women so that they can go on OnlyFans and enjoy American corruption and decadence, all right? Um, so so
Yeah,
so
it's
so yeah, so
so this
yeah,
statistic
so
says on Google that for women age 18 to 24, roughly 14% are active on OnlyFans. So that's 18 to 24, right? Imagine it's probably 20% or maybe 30% if you go up
yeah,
to 35, 40 years old. And the percentage of these women that are white, it's about 70%. So, and that's
that's
the
crazy.
narrative you're hearing from the Trump people. They're saying, oh, look, the libtards are getting owned. And they're posting images of Iranian girls stripping free of their niqab, their oppressive niqab, and now they're naked, which is so ridiculous because it's the conservative right saying the libtards are mad that women are on OnlyFans.
Yeah, yeah. So again, OnlyFans, I think, is the best indicator of a society in decline, right? So the Roman Empire, when it declined,
Yep.
the main problem was that women refused to have children, and so everyone was freaking out, like, what can we do about it? Civil war is another huge issue right now in America. What's happening in Minnesota, basically.
Mhm.
That currency debasement is a huge issue where the US dollar is not worth anything anymore. I mean, like look at this inflation. I mean, like look at US dollar compared with gold, right? So these boomers are happy about the fact that, their property prices are going way up, right? Maybe before in 1980, they bought their home for $100,000. Now it's worth $2 million. And so like we're rich. But what's funny is that if you take gold, right, and look at and ask yourself, if I were to buy gold, um, use gold to buy a house in 1980 as versus using gold to buy a house today, it'd be cheaper to buy gold to buy a house with gold now. I mean, that's just crazy to think about. Where the currency debasement has just been incredible, and people haven't even noticed it. So these are the signs of an empire in massive decline. And again, there's no way to reverse this decline. And so what the empire is doing is lashing out, right? If Russia completes the invasion of Ukraine, then Russia is now able to control 1/3 of the world's carbohydrates.
Hmm.
So if Russia wills it, the Middle East, Africa could starve to death. And right now, there's talk of Iran, Russia, and China creating a trade bloc, which then would negate American naval power. Okay, and if that were to happen, then that $40 trillion of debt that America has, America's stuck holding the bag. I mean, like that's just a bomb waiting to explode and destroy America. Because if this trade bloc were to come into being, then you can imagine that Europe, Africa, and the Middle East would all get involved as well. And people would just ignore America. The entire world would be like, oh, you want to impose tariffs on us? Well, we just won't trade with you then, right?
Right.
So this war in Iran, this war in Venezuela, Cuba, now Trump is talking about Mexico. He's talked about buying Greenland. He's talked about taking over Canada. Like he's being serious here because an empire needs to secure resources and trade routes, and that's what an empire does. So it's an empire in decline, and it's anxious, it's wounded, it's scared, and so it lashes out across the world.
Hmm. How many of these people, like Patrick Bet-David, I recently saw, he's like trying to copy your lectures a little bit, maybe you didn't see, but this is a good example of a Western Iranian he comes to America and encourages this war, but then he's not going to fight in there. He's not going to enlist. There might be a draft coming. I don't know if you think that's likely. And he doesn't go back to Iran with not going to fight in the war. Are these examples of Mossad paid influencers, or are they just completely brainwashed and don't know how to submit to the fact that Trump completely lied about everything he said he was going to do in his campaign?
So Patrick David, so he actually got in touch on Monday. He wanted to interview me. He wanted me on his show. And what happened was that was the same day that there was a concerted online campaign against me. Like it was just weird in that and that I went on Twitter and like everyone was attacking me, and like it was the same talking points where I just make stuff up, and like they picked the most silly things to attack me with. Okay, so for example, like last year I talked about how I didn't believe the Battle of Canine actually happened.
Yeah.
And I explained why I think this history was made up. And then like, well, you see, this guy is just full of it. This guy doesn't know history. Everyone, so I'm like, who are these people, and why is this happening all at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
So that interview request from Patrick Bet-David, it's sort of like, I'm like, like this must be a setup.
Yeah.
He wants me on a show so that he can provoke me into say something really stupid, so then he can, broadcast this around the world to discredit me. So I basically ignored his email.
It was the identical coordinated campaign that Candace Owens got when she started to make a video exposing Erica Kirk's past, and they revealed that there was an email from Turning Point where they were giving people a script, like Dan Bongino, former FBI director. They were saying that she's demonic, she's evil, and it was specifically from Turning Point paying influencers and telling them to run with this script. And after the script was released, you could tie it exactly to what Dan Bongino said and many other influencers. I saw the same exact coordinated attack on you. As soon as you start blowing up and they found that you were vindicated, all the Peter Thiel MAGA affiliated influencers all came out of nowhere to discredit you. But I think it really just made you more popular. I don't think that it was successful at all.
Yeah, and what's really funny is that a lot of these anti-China people, like these people who make these propaganda videos about China, saying what a corrupt regime the government is. For the reason, they went after me as well. So I wonder how much of the internet is actually organic. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
who are these people, and what's the problem with me? I'm not even talking about China, man. I'm talking about like Iran. Why are they
Yeah.
coming after me?
I mean, you're not anti-com, but you criticize communism heavily. And they say that if
Yeah,
you're a CCP plant, then you would love communism. But you talk about how this was created to distract people from faith and make people focused on secular politics. So there's
yep.
no real evidence that you would be, influenced by anybody other than your own research.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to come after me just because, I've made a lot of videos and I take a lot of controversial positions. And I say I'm only interested in intellectual speculation. I'm interested in ideas. I'm not taking a side. And what I do is I make predictions and I try to explain my predictions to better enlighten the population. So it's very hard for them to actually attack me, but that didn't stop them, you know?
Right. A lot of people wanted to ask you how you were able to predict so much, but I mean, it's pretty easy to understand. If you watch your lectures, and you mentioned it earlier in this conversation, that the best way to analyze behavior is see past behavior. And so
Yes, it's that simple.
it's really the fall of every empire is the arrogance and really the concept of hard times create strong men create good times create
Yeah.
weak men. And we're seeing the boomer effect right now. These boomers that dominate American politics, these evangelical Christian war
Mhm.
hawks that have nothing to do with Catholicism or Orthodox, they have this belief that God bless the state of Israel. They keep voting people in, they hoard the wealth, and then they criticize the youth while bringing us into the same exact wars. We found out that Iraq war, there were no weapons of mass destruction. And then right now, you accurately pointed out, the bombs that they're using and what's happening to the air quality and the environment in Iran, it's going to cause birth defects the same way. Even though there were a million civilian casualties in Iraq, there were so many birth defects as well from the chemical
Yeah,
weapons being used. And
yeah.
so history just repeats itself, predictive history.
Right. And they told us a plan already, right? Because right after 9/11, Wesley Clark said that he saw he talked to someone who saw a memo that said there's a plan to destroy 7 countries in the Middle East, right? And the last country standing is Iran. So they told us a plan already, and why not just take them at face value, right? Again, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. If they went after Iraq, Libya, Syria, Lebanon,
Yemen.
Sudan, yeah, yeah, why won't they go after Iran at some point?
Yeah, and Netanyahu said he's been trying to get this done for 40 years, and Trump finally did it. This is all public. And Marco Rubio said that Iran did not pose a threat on America, that they attacked because they were threatening Israel. It's clear who struck first, and people still buy the propaganda. The major lie that's being spread is that, okay, well, we can't allow Iran to have nuclear weapons. We can't allow Iran to have nukes. But Israel has nuclear weapons. And when JFK tried to investigate their nuclear program, you saw everybody knows what happened to JFK. As well, Israel has the Samson option, which is the ability, if I'm not mistaken, to nuke the world if too much anti-Semitism rises. So you have predicted and you've spoken about the ground troop potential invasion. I don't know when you think that is. Maybe you can answer that. But what is the potential of a nuke dropping?
Right. So I would actually discount a nuke dropping, okay? So and this is something that I think occupies a lot of people, but let me explain why I don't think this will ever happen, okay? Okay. The first reason is the Samson option. The Samson option, as you point out, is that Israel will literally nuke the entire world if its existence is threatened. Okay, it's not a conspiracy. It's just their policy. Okay, so that's a strategic nuclear arsenal you're using for strategic purposes. If you want to use a nuke in a war, that's something called a tactical nuclear strike, right? Now, it's actually hard to change military doctrine in the middle of a war. It's almost like asking a football team to go play hockey, right? Because remember, a military is a bureaucracy. There's everyone's trained to think a certain way, and so a tactical nuclear weapon would go against every military doctrine in the world. So I don't think that so if people talk about it, but I think it's beyond the capacity of both the Israelis and Americans to actually use a tactical nuclear weapon in Iran. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two is that you would use a tactical nuclear weapon if you want to win this war at all costs. But that's assuming these guys want to win this war. But if you look at the eschatology, right? If you look at the entire premise of the Greater Israel Project, they want to actually lose this war. Why? Because the point of America going into Iran with a ground invasion is for Americans to lose so badly that they're forced out of the Middle East. America is forced to go back into the Western Hemisphere. They no longer involve themselves in the Middle East. And so when America goes, CENTCOM, Central Command, folds naturally into Israel, thus creating the Greater Israel Project, right? All these American bases, all the American technology, the satellites, the airplanes, the bombs, all go into Israel, right? So it benefits actually Israel to drag this war out as long as possible, to force a ground invasion that destroys American morale, and then they pick up the pieces, right? The longer this war goes on, the more destruction there is, the more Israel benefits. So Israel is now getting bombarded, especially Tel Aviv, by Iranian missiles. But you may not have known this, but there are actually Israelis in Tel Aviv burning down their own homes for the insurance money, right? So the Israelis have absolutely no problem with destroying their own country if it means more profit in the future. Okay, they don't. So that's their calculus. Okay, that's point number two. Like they don't want to win this war; they want to lose this war. Point number three is this: if Iran were to collapse, if the Israelis and Americans succeed in occupying Iran, Russia would be in a lot of trouble. And we talked about this last time, right? Where Russia would be insistent on making sure that Iran is coherent. And so there's reporting from the Washington Post that right now the Russians are providing targeting intelligence to the Iranians, and that's why these missile strikes are so accurate. Also, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, has said that the Russians are interested in the Iranians winning this war. And I'm sure through back channels, the Russians have informed the Americans and Israelis, don't go too far. Do not use nukes, okay? And at some point, if there is a ground invasion, I would not be surprised if Putin came out in public and said that Iran is now under the Russian nuclear umbrella, which means that if we detect any tactical nuclear strike in Iranian territory, that would be considered an attack on Russian territory as well, and Russia will respond accordingly, okay? So for these three reasons, I think the possibility of a nuclear weapon being used is almost zero.
And we've seen Putin made it clear that he's against this. He does not think that U.S.-Israel starting this war was justified. And we've also heard the U.S. criticize Russia for providing intel to Iran. So it's clear where the players are. Many other players are getting involved. France is supporting U.S.-Israel. They criticize the U.K., even though Keir Starmer seems like he's trying to seem like he's part of the U.S.-Israel operation, but they said that he's a traitor. Spain has refused to join in. Who are the other key players around the world that we should be paying attention to in this conflict?
Yeah, so Turkey is a wild card. And so obviously the Americans and Israelis want to drag Turkey into this war. Pakistan is a wild card as well, primarily because they have nuclear weapons. Now, Pakistan is an interesting problem because during the 12-day war, Pakistan voiced support to the Iranians. But then a few months later, Pakistan signed a mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, which meant that if Saudi Arabia is under attack, then Pakistan must come to its defense, primarily by using nuclear weapons. Okay? So if Israel is able to stage more false flags against Saudi Arabia, and if Saudi Arabia declares war against Iran, then Pakistan would be obligated by this treaty to enter the war against Iran. And Pakistan might actually be the place where the Americans actually staged the ground invasion from, okay? Because the south east of Iran is actually much more vulnerable than the northwest of Iran. So that's a possibility. Okay, so Pakistan is a wild card. Another wild card is North Korea, right? So let me explain why. When the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the economies that are most impacted are actually the Asian economies. So Pakistan receives a lot of oil from the Strait of Hormuz. India receives about 60% of its oil from Strait of Hormuz. China is about 40%. Japan is about 75%. Okay, so this is a huge impact on these economies, and they're struggling. In this sort of situation, North Korea can be a wild card because North Korea can make things complicated by threatening South Korea, right? Now you're diverting attention and resources to dealing with North Korea. And why would North Korea do this? Because it's this game theory. It's just like, like if you are, the poor kid on the block and you have an opportunity to steal from other people, then do so. Why won't you do so, right? So because of this conflict, if North Korea just says to South Korea, you either give us $1 trillion or we'll just bombard you with artillery, guess what? They're gonna get $1 trillion, okay? So North Korea is a wild card. I would not be surprised if very soon conflict arises between North and South Korea. Also, Japan is a wild card as well because China, I mean, it's sort of self-sufficient, but Japan is a very wealthy country that is completely dependent on global supply chains, right? So the Prime Minister Takayashi said to the cabinet that if this thing continues, if this war continues, if the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, we will run out of oil, we will run out of energy, not oil, but energy in 7 to 8 months. Okay, people don't really appreciate how much petroleum is the basis for the global economy because not only does it give you energy, but it also gives you plastic products, right? It also gives you access to high tech, right? So the entire EV industry, artificial intelligence, anything high tech is dependent on access to petroleum, right? So Japan cannot afford to wait. It needs to take the initiative. And I don't know what that means, okay? But I imagine it means two things. The first is massive deindustrialization so that you are less dependent on energy. The second is massive remilitarization so that you are able to create your own supply networks, okay? So Japan and North Korea, I think, are also two major wild cards. Then you go to Europe, and Britain, France, and Germany have discussed the possibility of entering this war. France, I think, is going to send an aircraft carrier for who knows why. It's just like why? What's the point here? But like the issue for these European countries is that because of the Ukraine war, they lost access to cheap Russian energy. And so they became dependent on Middle Eastern energy, especially Qatari LNG. Well, guess what? When the war started, Qatar announced that they shut down all their LNG, which supplies 20% of the world's LNG, by the way. Okay, so the Europe is in a lot of trouble. I mean, this war could actually bankrupt and deindustrialize Europe. Plus, if this war continues, you're going to have more refugees flowing into Europe, which is going to cause a lot more conflict. Plus, Europe is committed to sending ground troops to Ukraine by 2029 or 2030. Okay, they've talked about drafting young men to go die in the trenches of Ukraine. So Europe's in a lot of trouble, and we could see the systemic collapse of Europe, basically break down a civil war because of this crisis right now. So Europe is a wild card, yeah, that's about it.
Okay, and you brought up the fact. I want to ask you. So, part of Islamic eschatology, it says that the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims will be fighting against each other until they realize the greater enemy. And you pointed out the immigration problem. This has been a cycle where there's war in the Middle East, and then of course there's so many immigrants because you destabilize the country, you implement regime change, and then people need a place to live. Then the majority Muslim nations, these people go into Europe, predominantly white Christian countries, and there's conflict and they start blaming the Muslims. They start hating. But there's many videos of rabbis saying, well, actually, we love this and the Goyim are fighting each other. They don't really see the bigger picture and what's going on. And eventually in Islamic eschatology, it says Christians and Muslims will unite and realize what is going on. But if it's true that Israel wants America to lose this war so that they have dominant control over the Middle East, because they exist off of American dollars and American troops, how could they afford and how could they protect and how could they have greater Israel without American support? They're a small population. They would have less money. Are they capable of controlling the Middle East without America?
Right. So I think that's one of the great misconceptions in the world, which is that Israel is dependent on American power. That's not true, actually. Israel is far more superior than people recognize. Israel has the most dominant military in the Middle East. In fact, I would argue that it's really the American military that restrains the power of the Israelis. That's point one. The Israel military, especially its military intelligence, basically Unit 8200, is very powerful. We have to remember that in modern warfare, it's not really about land armies. It's not really about war of attrition. It's more about technology, right? So drone strikes, targeted assassinations, electronic warfare. These things matter a lot more. And the Israelis have proven themselves to be extremely competent in this regard. So go back to the 2000, go back to the Hezbollah pager attacks, right? Where one like it was a coordinated explosion of pagers. Think about the amount of resources that Israel needed to have in order to pull that off. And remember, that's just one thing that we know about. And that's point one. Like the Israeli military is far more sophisticated than people give it credit for. But it's just their MO to hide themselves, to pretend that they're weak and to completely dependent on American power. That's just their game plan. Okay, that's point one. Point two is that you assume that Israel is only the nation state of Israel. That's not true. The nation state of Israel also can draw on the Jewish diaspora, right? So if you are a wealthy Jewish business person in Nairobi or Cape Town, you probably have Mossad links, okay? And we can know because of the Epstein files. Go back to the early 20th century and look at like gangsters like Meyer Lansky. And Whitney Webb. I'm not sure if you interviewed
Yeah,
Whitney
I
Webb,
want
but
to.
she documents this. Yeah, but she's wonderful. She documents how Meyer Lansky, the Brofman families, these are all Jewish mafia families that have really close ties to the state of Israel. In fact, you could argue like they weren't really mobsters; they were really operatives on behalf of this Jewish diaspora in order to create the financing, the weaponry, the political patronage in order to help support Israel. And you can imagine that this criminal network, what eventually happened is they didn't go away. What happened was that they intermarried into the national security apparatus, right? Because remember, the CIA was founded with mafia support,
Yeah.
both the Jewish mafia support and the Italian mafia support. Why? Because during the Cold War, the CIA did not have foreign intelligence networks, but the Jews and Italians did have foreign intelligence networks. Okay,
So this is how they
so
were smuggling weapons in. This is the
exactly,
mafia was bringing weapons in from around. So it's not really the nation state of Israel is the land, but it's really
yeah,
organized the system of Pax Judaica all working together.
that's
That's why
right.
when you
Actually,
say
that's exactly
it's
right.
Pax Judaica, so when you say Epstein worked for Israel because he was financed by Leslie Wexner and Leon Black, Jewish Zionists, although they live in America, it's still supporting the
That's
greater
right.
idea and the belief
That's
in that
right.
eschatology. They go
That's
hand in
right.
hand. So when people like,
Right.
Hassan Piker, they say it's fascism, that is a really minimal way to discuss what is Jewish supremacy, and which goes to the Chabad Lubavitch sect, which Tucker Carlson has accurately
Yes.
pointed out, and rabbinical Judaism, which is not part of original Torah Judaism.
Right. So what's really important to understand is that the nation state of Israel is just a tool in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
Okay. So you talk about Chabad Lubavitch, which is what Tucker Carlson talked about.
Yeah.
Well, Chabad Lubavitch is just the current manifestation of a movement called Sabbatean Francus, and I talked about that in my lectures,
Yeah.
right? So the Chabad Lubavitch, uh, so like if you just look at the Epstein files, what you recognize is that this guy was above the nation state. It was just assumed for the longest time that he was a Mossad agent, and Epstein Island was a honeypot operation where he lured, these very powerful Americans like Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, to the Epstein Island so that he could film them in compromising activities. And now, if you actually look at the reporting, you actually look at the Epstein files, what we recognize is that no, that's not true. The Epstein Island was just a weekend getaway, and he was filming them for fun. It was not a blackmail operation. In fact, when Bill Gates and Reid Hoffman, billionaires, okay, these are billionaires, when they were asked, why were you associating with this guy, Jeffrey Epstein? Their response was, we wanted his money. we were hoping that he would give us money, which is like, what are you talking about? You guys are billionaires. Why do you need his money? So, so it's very confusing. Plus, he was using code words like, what the hell is pizza and grape soda?
And
What the hell is
jerky
going
and
to the
ice creams.
dentist and beef jerky? What is that crap? Okay, so none of this makes sense. But but if you assume that he was an operative not for the nation state of Israel, but for a movement that's
Mhm.
trying to achieve a certain eschatology, the
Right.
Chabad Lubavitch people, that makes a lot more sense, right? Because the leader of Chabad Lubavitch is Rabbi Schneerson. And I'm not sure if you know this, but
He
they
claims
are
to be the
extremely
Messiah.
wealthy. Yeah, he claims the Messiah, and um, and Jerry Epstein was basically an operative who was trying to achieve worldly um, gains in order to help this movement achieve its eschatology, right? They're trying to accelerate the end times. They're trying to bring about the coming of the Messiah and the destruction of the world so that they can repair the world. Their language is actually redemption and repair the world. And and then you're like, okay, I don't understand this. Okay, then think about this, okay? When Jeffrey Epstein died, who replaced him? And then you ask yourself, okay, who is Jared Kushner? And why is he involved in Ukrainian peace negotiations? Why is he an envoy to Israel on behalf of Trump? And why is he participating in the Iranian peace negotiations? Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are envoys who went to Ukraine to negotiate with Putin to end the war. They met with Zelensky to end the war. They are very close with Netanyahu. And then they represented Trump in peace negotiations with the Iranians. Who are these people, right? Jared Kushner is a replacement for Jeffrey Epstein. And that
Mm.
all makes sense if you think about it that way. And so, what are these guys trying to do? They're trying to fulfill eschatology. They're
Mhm.
trying to position world events in a certain way that would accelerate the collapse of the world, which is what Jeffrey Epstein did. Remember, we only have at most 50% of his emails. It's possibly it could be 2% of his emails. We know nothing about what he was doing during 9/11. In fact, you may not know this, but Howard Lutnick,
Yep.
who was chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald, the firm
His firm was
that was destroyed.
600 dead, about, one quarter,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah, yeah.
3,000
But
deaths.
miraculously,
He wasn't there.
he and his brother were not there
Right. And
that
he's the
that
current
day.
Secretary of
Miraculously.
Commerce under Trump today. Next door neighbors
Right.
with Epstein. Epstein lived in building 9. Howard Lutnick lived in building 11.
So you know, right? Like what a strange coincidence that is. 9/11, right?
Yeah.
So we can assume that there was involvement. Jeffrey Epstein was involved in 9/11. And he was involved with Libya. He was involved with the 2008 great financial crisis. So this guy was clued in on all these geopolitical events. So who was this guy and what was he doing? And if you think about it, it's very similar to what Jared Kushner is doing today, right? Where, Jared Kushner is working in finance. He's got $2 billion from the Saudis, and now he's manipulating events in the Middle East. And again, the point is to bring about the end times, which is what Tucker Carlson talked about.
Right.
And like you can't talk about this because how about Lubavitch is apparently a very sensitive topic. I watched Tucker Carlson's discussion, and he didn't really say anything. Okay, I mean, like it was not that. I mean, like it was just all publicly available information about Habit Lubavitch, and he was attacked
Yeah.
constantly online
Yeah.
for just mentioning Habit Lubavitch,
Mhm.
right? But if you want to understand how everything works, just go do an investigation about Habit Lubavitch. Look at their eschatology.
Yeah.
Look at Rabbi Sneerson and what he did. There's a very famous video online of Robert Sneerson talking to Netanyahu. And this is in the 1980s, guys.
Yeah.
This is in the 1980s. And Sneerson's like, the Messiah, we have to bring him back. Let's speed it up, man.